questions. So, hey Yash, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you fine. Okay, and Aro, just to check, can you please start the recording?
Yeah, I already started recording, Ritika. Yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so over to you, Yash.
Right, thank you. So I'll start sharing my screen. Please let me know when you can see it.
It's visible, Yash.
All right. So, hey everybody, welcome back after the lunch break. I hope it was nice. After such a long session or a long day, or at least half day of learning on the PL 100 or PL 900 content, we are now going to continue on with desktop flows. So basically, before starting that, I'll just quickly introduce myself. I'm Yash Agarwal and I'm a Microsoft MVP and MCT for business applications. I'm also a super user for the Power Apps and Power Automate community forums. You can connect with me with these links on the screen, or you can also connect with me on LinkedIn by scanning this QR code. In today's session now, we're going to talk about desktop flows, how you can create desktop flows, when to use desktop flows, what are the best practices. We'll take a look at a couple of demos. We'll see like a comparison between cloud and desktop flows, when to use what, and so on. So let's get started with that. First of all, what are desktop flows? Basically, as the name suggests, you automate tasks on a desktop. You create these flows or automation processes on a desktop to automate a set of tasks which involve desktop applications or probably legacy applications. It could also be web applications. Now, a desktop flow can be triggered from a cloud flow. Basically, whatever you're creating as a part of a desktop flow, an automation piece, let's say, you start a Chrome browser, you record a few steps, you select some output from those browser window, and you want to send it back to some place at least. So this is going to all be packaged in desktop flow, which is further being called from cloud flow as an action, and we'll see how we'll do that. Further, you can run advanced automation with over 400 actions. I mean, there's many actions on desktop flows, and by actions I do not mean connectors over here. On cloud flows, we use connectors. On desktop flows, we are using actions, and these actions include OCR. You could generate hashes. You could run command line scripts. You could run PowerShell scripts, and so on. We'll take a look at a brief overview of what all those actions can do as well. And then desktop flows can also run on virtual machines. As cloud flows run on the cloud, you can just access your account and you can see a run history anywhere. The desktop flows can run on a standalone machine, on a physical machine, or on a virtual machine as well. Now we'll discuss more about why we would use one approach over the other soon. And then coming to why to use desktop flows. Now, one of the main reasons why some automation scenarios require desktop flows is because of legacy applications. By legacy applications, I mean applications that are built to be used on a specific Windows machine itself. We can see we've come across a lot of accounting softwares that open up only on a Windows machine, and there's no API or a service configured to that which you can call using Cloudflow and consume those services to complete an automation. In such cases, to automate these legacy applications or to modernize these legacy applications, it requires us to use those desktop flows. What a desktop flow would ideally do when you're automating a legacy application is you can record the entire process. Basically, by recording, I mean you perform a certain number of steps and you make a recording of that using the Power Automate desktop tool. It converts those steps into actionable items that can be run within the Power Automate desktop flow itself. For example, let's say if it was an accounting software where you wanted to create an entry. So let's say you start the application, you open a specific file, you go to a particular column or a cell or a tab where you would input some data. After inputting that data, let's say you perform certain actions and then you finally save it. So something like this is not doable, or an API service is not configured on this provider of the application. So how you would do it on a desktop flow is you can complete this business transaction while the recorder is recording, and then you provide the data that you want to from a different action to the desktop flow, which will then further run this process and fill up or do whatever actions you were doing. And then you can also process heavy data. For example, let's say if you have an output file coming on a daily basis that you want to process and you want to send that data to some other place, you could do that also. Then there are running code components. One of the major issues when we automate flows using cloud flows is that it does not, it has certain actions that could run code components, but it is not very flexible as desktop flows are. So in a cloud flow, you could run a partial script, but for that you would have a dependency on Azure automation accounts and so on. However, on a desktop flow, you can directly run a partial script. You could save a script and you can keep calling it by providing the specific path. Also, you could pass parameters, you could get outputs from those partial scripts, and then you can do whatever with it in consecutive actions of your desktop flow. It's not just limited to partial. You could also call a JavaScript. You could also run. There's a bunch of programs that you could run, and you could also utilize the entire command line terminal over there. Then there is automation with manual inputs. Now, when you're using cloud flows, there are multiple options of triggers, as Venkat was mentioning in the previous session. You could use a flow that is manually triggered by a button, a flow which is triggered by an event, or a flow which is triggered on a schedule. But then, once the flow is triggered, it is going to complete that automation without any requirement of an input from a user. However, if your process would be in a way where a person would have to first review half of the automation process that has been completed, and once they provide their input, the automation could branch in separate ways. So that is called as attended automation, attended RPA. We'll be discussing a little bit more about that in the next few slides, but desktop tools allows you to do that. So let's say if you were processing some data, like a credit card approval is happening, the system is set up in a way that you get the credit score from a different application, you get the user data from a different application. It combines everything in a single place, and a person has to actually sign that off. Now, we could argue that this could also be done using approvals and cloud flows, but then getting an input from a user is entirely different over when you're doing with it with attended RPA. Then there is repetitive actionable tasks. So, of course, we could do that using cloud flows also, but imagine a process where you're manually having to complete a business transaction, and this process is repeated over and over and over again. So, you could automate that using a desktop flow, and then within a desktop flow, you could create subflows where there are certain actions that have to be automated. Certain actions that are used on different phases of that automation. For example, logging on to a website and uploading a file. So that logging on and logging out of that website can be modularized in a smaller way, which could be repeatedly used across different processes when you're working on the same application. Moving forward to how actually can we do this. Now we've understand what is desktop flows, why do we use it, that's all good, but how are we going to actually implement a use case, or how are we going to analyze an automation scenario and finally develop it with desktop flows. The very first item over here would be to decide the scope of automation. There's a lot that can be done with desktop flows, but that does not mean that we are actually going to use a desktop flow for that. And then setting a scope for automation would also allow you to see what all capabilities are available in the software, and how best you can use that, because there are a lot of processes that can be automated, but the desktop flow is not a very optimal solution for that. So it is very important to first highlight the scope of the automation and analyze the process that you're trying to automate using a desktop flow. Then there is a question always going to come up for cloud flows versus desktop flows. So if a process can be automated using cloud flows, then that would be the first option to go with, compared to doing it with a desktop flow. For example, let's say if I have a scenario where somebody sends me an Excel file on a daily basis, and I want to download that to a desktop. Now, I would say that okay, email when an email arrives, I can use that trigger in a cloud flow. But how am I going to download the file on a desktop? I'm going to use RPA or a desktop flow for that. But then the same thing could be done using the file system connector on cloud flows with an on-premises data gateway. So the ideal choice here would be to go with a cloud flow. Whereas if the solution would require that, okay, this Excel file has some data which I want to read and then send it over to a SharePoint list. But then the problem here is the Excel file data is not formatted as a table. In that case, I would again store the file using the cloud flow, open it in a desktop flow, and then read all those rows and finally send it back to a cloud flow so that it can update the SharePoint. So it is very important where the desktop flow part fits in, and it is very important to actually break down the process that you're automating to decide that part. And then obviously the business value of the process. So it is important that we also see like how valuable that process is going to be. Is it going to confuse my users or not? And the time and effort that is going to take to build it versus the license cost and so on. This is just from a very brief overview point, but these granular details will obviously help in better scoping out the project or the automation you're working on. And then finally, there are two options that you can use in desktop flows. One is attended automation, and the other is unattended one. What happens in attended one is the base requirement is that the system that the automation is going to run on needs to be in unlocked mode. So you cannot lock that system and go away while the automation is running, because attended again by definition it means that somebody is actually monitoring that process, and this allows you to actually provide some inputs for the if the automation requires the user to provide certain inputs in the complete phase of automation, you could use this option. But for example, if you don't require any input from the user, like we go back to the Excel file option where something is being emailed to a generic email account, a flow is going to extract that document and save it on desktop. Your desktop flow is going to read whatever is there in that Excel and then send it over back to your flow so that it can save it on SharePoint. So something like this does not require any user input, and that can be set up on an unattended mode. And an unattended mode desktop flow runs on the virtual machine in the backend. The system is locked. It's just that the virtual machine needs to be connected. So something of that sort. And then obviously dependent applications. So how best do your dependent applications support the usage of a desktop flow? For example, certain Windows applications or legacy systems that we try to automate do not recognize the selectors itself when you're trying to record the process. So it is very important to also analyze that part when you're building the desktop flow, because if it does not recognize those selectors or if it is not recognizing the keys that you're pressing on that application, then the process will not be completed at all. Now that we have a very brief understanding of how, what, and why desktop flows can be used, we'll take a look at a small demo of merging two PDF files. So the use case over here is like an operator keeps getting these PDF files from a customer. Let's take an example, best example of an insurance company. So this insurance company is set up in a way where multiple agents go to the customer, get a certain set of documents. Now, this person who's at desk, their job is to collate all these PDF documents and merge them into one file so that it can be sent to the approving officer. And the approving officer can finally review all the documents, whatever was there, and then finally provide an approval. Now, the manual process over here is that all the PDF files have to be collected and then finally, go to a software and keep merging them. We'll see how we can directly, automate this process. One other issue that I have been facing today is like using a Windows 10 home machine, and it does not allow me to connect to the cloud flows. So we'll just be doing this manually and trigger it over here itself. And before we start with the process, actually, let's take a look at the desktop flow editor. So this is our desktop flow portal where when you install Power Automate Desktop, this is how the application looks like. You can sign into your account and you'll be able to see all the environments that you're a part of. You could change your environments by clicking this over here. And then you can go to settings and you can see like what is the status. Like it is always best to use the latest version of the application so that your machines and your automation is properly being monitored on the cloud as well. And then let's see what else is there here. All right. So you can also see examples. This was added recently, I believe, where you can see some categories. And we'll go to my flows and we'll start creating a new flow. If you already had flows, you would be able to see them over here. So let's create a new flow over here. I'm going to name it as merge PDF documents. Create. While this is loading, we'll just quickly check what the document looks like. So I have a PDF file called as c1.pdf over here. I have some basic details over here of a form. And then I have another c1.2.pdf where I'm able to see a different form. The same form with different details. I just want to merge these two PDF files into one file, and how are we going to do that? Close this again, come back here. This is how the editor looks like when you are trying to create desktop flows. On the extreme left, we have the set of actions that you can see, variables, conditions, and so on and so forth. You could interact with Azure. There's cognitive services as well. And then we have this part where this is the main canvas where we drag and drop the actions to work on. And then there's a part called subflows where you could start creating subflows that can be associated to the main flow. And then we have the recorder button over here. After clicking which, a recorder would pop up and it would record all the actions that you're performing on the system. And then here we have the variables where you define the input and output variables. An input variable is when you are triggering this desktop flow from a cloud flow, what all inputs you want to pass. And the output variable would be like once this desktop flow is completed, what all outputs you want to pass on to the cloud flow. So let's start by creating an input variable first. Although we're not going to use this, but this would be the ideal way of how the automation would be built. So I would say an array of file locations. This would be text for now. And I'm not going to put anything over here. We'll just copy over the same thing for the external name. And as you can see, it allows me to mark this as sensitive. So for an example, if you were calling this desktop flow from a cloud flow, where a user, let's say, manually triggers that cloud flow to perform a certain action, and this desktop flow, whatever application it is going to automate or it is going to work on, has a password protected access. So the user enters the password on the cloud flow and passes it on to the desktop flow, and you can mark it as sensitive, so it is not going to show that on the flow run history and so on. I'm going to save this. And ideally, when I was building this merge PDF documents flow, if it would interact with my cloud flow, the cloud flow would actually send me the array of all the file locations which are stored on the desktop. It could just probably also share the folder paths to the folder where all these files are, and I could list those down and create that PDF. Now, with a few simple, or with just one simple action here, I have this PDF. So as you can see, there are multiple actions under the PDF over here. You could extract text, you could extract tables, images, and so on. But I'm going to use this merged PDF file, and it's going to be a very simple, straightforward one. So here you can see it asks me to provide all the PDF files. Let's say I select a file over here. I'm going to look for PDF. So this is one of the files, but I can also select a folder over here. So it's going to list the entire folder and create PDF files out of it. So let's say I click on desktop here and select this folder, check PDF, click OK. But then I also have one other folder over there. So what I'm going to do here is this file needs to be merged. These two files in there. And over here we will change the folder to desktop and check PDF files to be merged. It's going to take this one, and the merged PDF file path, we are going to put it over here again. Check PDF merged files. Alright, it's looking for the file here. So what I'm going to do is let's do one thing very quick. I will copy this, put it in the merged files, rename the file as merged 0.1-. Although it's not merged right now, it's just a temporary file. We'll be able to see one here. I'm going to come back and just open the check PDF merged files. Take this over. If the file exists, overwrite it. And then there are some advanced options where I can put a PDF, put a password over here, or this is also to access the original PDF files. Those can also be password protected. And then the query will produce as a merged PDF file path. Save. Now, it also in the rest of those, you also have an action called as show a message box. Let's say I have this display message now, assuming that before the merge PDF there was a further long process that has been triggered, but then it is going to take some time. I just want to stop or place a stopper between after the PDF file has been created and the next action. So I can do this display message, which will keep the flow stopped until I click the save button here. So let's say notification as the title of the box. No merged file is the text to display along with the merged PDF file path. And then I can else run, it's going to show the OK button over here. I can select any of these. So if it was an attended mode and I see a display message from the previous actions, I can select these as well. So abort the process or retry, ignore, and something like that. I'm just going to select OK now, and this is fine. So let's say hopefully this works. Let's quickly run this and see. And alright, so it does not recognize that. In that case, what we're going to do is we are directly going to pass on the file path here. Which is earlier. So we know it's C1. Then comma should work. Apparently, it's not working that way. Just give me one sec. Let me check out one video. What we can do is remove this and look for a variable. So let's select this one, set a variable, and value is going to be the file path. So let's copy.
Yash, your voice
Sorry,
is breaking in between.
can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear now. Yeah, it's
All right.
much better. Yeah.
I was speaking a little low, just
Yeah.
speaking to myself at that. I'm sorry.
Okay, sure.
Hopefully this works. Let's see. Okay, interesting. It's not accepting the other input. Something probably changed. Let me check that real quick. Just want to try the folder part again. Let's do a last try with the folder again. If it does not work, I'll come back with a solution on that. Let's try one more thing. Alright, it's not allowing to do that. Let me check that part and get back. Until then, we'll move on to the next part. Um, so coming back to the uh, PPT over here, the learnings from a demo one would be basically I was trying to show you how we could pass multiple values in a single input, but that did not happen. So we'll revisit that later on. But we can see that directly we can use multiple actions on the desktop flow under different branches. Like we've seen the PDF part. Similarly, there's something called as the HTTP part where you could invoke a web service or a SOAP web service if you wanted to interact with an online service. And then there are multiple options for browser automation. There's also this cryptography part where if you wanted to generate a hash that needs to be sent for authenticating to an external system, you could do that also. Now we'll move to the second demo part over here, um, where we're going to see how we can take data from an Excel file. Now, this Excel part is something which has been long given discussions where an Excel file with data would not be readable by a cloud flow because it was not properly formatted into a table. But however, the data was still formatted. So I'll show you how that file looks like and why we would use a desktop flow instead of a cloud flow to read it. So on my demo 2 over here, I have this Excel worksheet. You can see that although it's not formatted in a table, but the data is still pretty much formatted. So what we're going to do is we're going to see how we can build steps in a desktop flow to accurately read this data and get those comma separated values to be sent over to a cloud flow and then perform further actions on it. I'll close this here. We're going to come back to our desktop flow. Let's delete these actions for now. And I'm going to search for Excel over here. You should be able to see it here. So in the Excel, first we're going to launch the Excel file. So we're going to use the launch Excel button. And you can select with a blank document if you're working on a fresh one, or if you just want to open an existing document, you could do that. We're going to open an existing document and I'm going to pass the file over here. So that's going to be my demo 2, and this is the worksheet. Now, once I have this, I can open the file as a read-only one, or if I just want this to happen in the background, I can uncheck this so it will not show me the Excel file. But we want to see that, so we're going to see make this instance visible and save this. Now, basically, in this Excel file, if you'll see here, we have to also notify the flow or the desktop flow where to read what from. So if I come back over here, let's say if I select this read from an Excel workbook or a worksheet, it's going to ask me if I want to retrieve the value of a single cell, then I have to provide the start column and the start row of it, or I can select that from a range of cells, I can select from a selection or all values from a worksheet. So if I select a selection over here, it's going to actually show me like where to retrieve what from. But I'm going to select a range of cells over here where it's going to ask me to enter the start column, the start row, the end column, and end row. Now, if I see this file, I know that the start column is this and the start row is this. So A and 1 are the start over here. But this could have data like there could be multiple rows or there could be multiple columns as well. But in a fixed report kind of a situation where your system is sending is outputting an Excel report and that is being emailed to a person, which then needs to be processed by the desktop flow. We'll see how we can identify the row until which we should read it and the column which we should read it from. So I'll cancel this. I'll look up for this action where it's going to ask me get the first free column or row from the Excel worksheet. So I'm going to drag and drop that one over here. We're passing the Excel instance and it is going to produce two variables for us, the first free column and the first free row. Now let's save this. Um, at this point, when this action runs, it is basically going to provide me with the first free row, which is number 4, and the first free column, which is D. So I do not want to read until then, but -1 of that. So when I pass on read from the Excel worksheet here, the value from the range of cells, my start column is 1, my start row is also 1, my end column is basically the first free column and the end row is the first free row. If I save it and then add an action, let's say the message box itself to show the data here, and the message to display would be whatever came in the Excel and save. We're going to close this file and run this flow now. So it launches the Excel file first and then reads everything and see if you see it shows me this. So I have A1 red 21, the first part, and then I had this unwanted last item. And if I see this over here in the Excel data, it's going to show me this. There's an extra column 4 and extra column 3. So how you can pass those inputs or parameters over here is when you're passing end column, I can just place the cursor between the mod and the first free column, put a -1 over here. So it's going to take one less from there. And if I put a -1 here, it's going to take the first previous row and then run it again. So you will see that I have whatever actual data is present there. And if I open this Excel data as a tab, you can see this over here. So the main benefit of this is if your data is not formatted in a proper table, which is a main requirement of a cloud flow, and it is coming from an email, like you have a generic email box, the email arrives over there, you have the Excel file, you just have to extract that data from an Excel file and push it to another system. This would be one of the best ways to do it. And even if you wanted to get the data into a Power Automate flow, you get it as a comma separated lines. You can perform certain string manipulations over there and they utilize this data to further push it into the other system. We'll close this now and we'll go to the next part. So basically the main learnings from this is Excel automation is also quite easy and there are a lot of other options that can be done using a desktop flow. And you can also read data which is not formatted into a proper table as well. And then my next demo is basically it's going to be from a pre-recorded one. So that is a little more complex scenario that we have. And obviously due to my system not being connected, I cannot build it live. So this is something that I built previously. It has been a long while. And this one demos of how you can integrate a cloud flow and a desktop flow. So the gist of the demo is basically there is an HR system which is managing the pays or the paychecks of employees, and every time a pay is approved by the HR, it has to be entered into the system legacy application where the bookkeeping is done. So we'll see that over here. I have a SharePoint list where I have details of all the employees, what are the total hours they've worked, what is the pay, and then in my ledger book, what ledger it goes for, and which account it has to come from, what is the status. This all information is being provided directly from the HR. But now, once they have provided this information, once the values have been approved, I need to grab a data that is the entry value from the bookkeeping software so that I can update the employee and they can track their request or If they wanted to get any further information, they could use that tracking number and get it from the HR or accounts. So let's see how that would work. Here we're just first creating a new item that is for an employee. You're putting their name and then the total hours they have worked for, what was the pay per hour, which analysis ledger this has to go to. And the important part is these choice types also are going to be sent over to the bookkeeping software along with the date and everything. So you also see if you're working with complex data types, it is also doable when you're working with cloud and desktop flows. So as you can see, it is under review. And then here I have this flow. Let me go back a little. So in this cloud flow, what is happening is I'm triggering this cloud flow when the item is modified on my SharePoint list. As soon as that gets approved, I want to trigger this flow and then call my desktop flow finally. You can see that I have this desktop flow action over here where I'm putting the transaction amount, the analysis ledger, and so on. Let's see how that would work. So as soon as I approve this, as soon as we approve this, the flow will be triggered. We should be able to see the flow run popping anytime. So once the flow is triggered, it is going to call that action on the Power Automate desktop. So you'll see that this is a virtual machine where I have the Power Automate desktop running. And I have the first action over here where we have recorded the process of this VT cash book, where it's going to add that transaction to the ledger. So this is all happening automatically using the desktop flow. You can see how fast it is. So let me just reverse 10 seconds and we'll come back again. So this, and from this point onwards, it's all the desktop flow, whatever actions you're seeing here. It fills up the details, it closes it off, and then the flow run completes. But 10, let's reverse 10 seconds over here. Let's see what's happening. So whatever information we passed on, like this T and number, this is auto-generated from the system. The date we passed on from our cloud flow and the SharePoint list. The employee details also we passed from there. We passed the total amount that has to be paid to them, and then what ledger it should go to, what account it should come from. So it takes just a matter of seconds to complete that record and then it completes the flow. Now, once the desktop flow is completed, as I have shown you in my previous demo, that there was something called as an output variable that we can send out from a desktop flow. So once the transaction has been completed or the transaction has been added to the ledger book, I want to grab that ID and send it as an output variable to my cloud flow so that it can be shared on the SharePoint list. You'll see that all this information was passed. It is taking a few more seconds for the cloud flow to realize that the desktop flow is completed. And then once the desktop flow completes, you'll see that in the output, I have this entry value as X number of zeros and 7, and that gets updated over here. And if I want to just verify that, I can go to the VT cash book again. On the cash book ledger, you can see over here, it's probably the row number 3 where I have the date, I have the reference number, I have the employee details and the payments that was completed. So this would complete the automation, and you can see that this VT software that we have, it does not have any API or any service that can be configured. And we are completely using this based on a recording that was done on this desktop flow. So that was about the third demo over here. Now let's move on and let's see what we have next. What are the learnings from this demo? Basically, a repetitive process that an employee has to perform, it can be automated. Earlier, we were using a recording which we were directly creating, but now there are tools like process mining that can help you or assist you with that. You can continuously record the processes, and then it suggests you what the exact output would be, and you can make certain changes and you can implement those processes as well. And also it's like once you have completed, once you pass data to a desktop flow from a cloud flow and the process has been completed, it is equally easy to grab some data and send it back to the cloud flow as well, so it can be processed further. Now moving on to the next slide, what do we have? So basically now coming to the best practices when you're working with desktop flows. So what usually happens is like when working with desktop flows, it is most important that, as I mentioned in the previous slides as well, it is most important that we first track down like how or is this process actually doable using a desktop flow? Should we actually automate that using a desktop flow, or should we do that using a cloud flow? Is the desktop flow a best fit for this? Because I mean, there are a lot of processes that can be automated, but again, a desktop or a Power Automate desktop flow is not a very well suited or an optimal solution for it. And then it is important to keep modularity or code reusability in mind. Breaking down a larger process into smaller subflows and then calling it into a main flow and then doing it with a cloud flow is a much better approach because it eases you on tracking where it is erroring out, or if there was any issue at any particular step, it would be easier to find that. It would also help in debugging that way. And then again, as I've mentioned previously as well, creating subflows, I mean, identifying what to be created as a subflow also helps. For example, if you have a process where you have to log into a website and perform a certain action, you have another process where you log into the same website but you perform a different action, and these two are different flows. So you could use that login subflow on both the flows. You could just from the point of code reusability, it would be efficient that way. And then there are different criterias based on your solution architecture that you can use to modularize a flow. It could be based on a certain set of actions. It could be based on a certain process as well. So as we saw, like an action would be copying or repetitively calculating something, but then a process would be something like logging in or logging out functionality. And then there is one more very important thing that we haven't seen on the actions when we were configuring the flow, that is error handling. In desktop flows, there are multiple ways on different actions that you can handle errors. In compared to cloud flows, where we just have a couple of options that if it errors out, we move to the next action, we use scope actions and so on. But in a desktop flow, you can see different options. For example, let's say if I were dealing with files, I wanted to launch this Excel file. What all options could I see when I wanted to handle error? If the file was not found, what the flow should do? Should it go and look up some other place, or continue the flow run, or do something else? So you can see that if the Excel application itself did not open, let's go to the file later on. But if the Excel application only did not open, what can I do? I can call a new rule where I set up a variable to notify that Excel file did not open, so it goes to this branch. Or I could run a subflow where it would retry this or get back to the same action, and there's multiple ways to do it. Similarly, if it failed to open that Excel document, Excel instance exists but the file did not open, so what I could do in that scenario. And then similarly, if I select a database based option, so there was one way where you could connect to, let's say, an Azure SQL machine, but then it has a different set of error handling actions that can happen if the connection was not established. What I can do, I'm unable to find that now, but you get this is right. We can set up different error handling options on different items, and it's also that it's also that you can also set up delays as we do in cloud flows, but it is very important that we appropriately handle that, especially in case of infinite loops or when you're using a do while loop and things like that. Because a desktop flow is a scheduled one and it gets orchestrated from a cloud flow. So if you're having one flow running and there is another in queue, it would be very difficult for that flow to run before this flow completes. So it is very important that you configure your delay actions appropriately. And then finally, it's like configuring error handles and notifications, which are easily understandable because debugging a desktop flow would be a very difficult process as well. In the flows that I have shown you, there were just 2 or 3 actions. But if I go back to the recording which I had, you can see the number of actions there. So let's say if I open this, the ones in the demo I showed you, like the merge PDF part, there was just one action. The Excel part, there were 3 or 4 straight up actions. But let's see what was there over here. So here, just at this point. So you can see that, okay, click UI element in a window. This was very poorly done because it was just for a demo, but I could rename these actions and give them a better meaning or add some comments so that a user, if they're going to analyze this process or debug it after me, then it should be easier for them to understand where it is going wrong, or if they wanted to make any changes, where they would make those changes. So it would be easier for the other developers to do that. With that said, we'll move to the next one from the best practices. Now, this was a very basic and an overview session of how you could get on or get started with Power Automate Desktop. What are the range of automation processes that you can look at? But if you really want to get into understanding how this works, by mistake I put this dashboard in a day. It should be RPA in a day. For Power Automate Desktop, there is proper Microsoft material which is found on this URL, RP in a day package. It would take 8 to 10 hours for you to properly learn this, and you can see the actual or the true power of how you could combine Power Automate Desktop and Cloud Flows to build enterprise level automation. And then again, if you're stuck with something, you can always log on to ourusers.microsoft.com where the entire community is available to help you. Or if you find some cool tips and tricks, you could always post them over there for everyone's benefit. Um, with that, I have completed my session. I'll just quickly check out the questions.
Yes, no question yet, but I think some advice came from the Kevin, who's the next speaker, about
Yes.
the issue which you faced, right? So,
Okay.
yeah, so something good he suggested to you.
Yeah, I was actually trying to do that get files in a folder action, but then it was not showing up over there. I actually implemented this earlier, but I totally forgot how I pass those multiple values. I have a blog post on that. I'll share a link to that
Yeah.
soon, so it'll be easier for the viewers also.
So guys, just want to share with you that Yash and Cleven are both are power users. I mean the community, and they actually contribute a lot for Power Automate and Power BI. So if you want to have any questions, which Yash asked you, right? If you want to have questions, these guys, Yash and Cleven, they will help you guys. And at times I also ask in the community, and they reply to me as well.
Thank
So
you.
yeah, something which is very useful, that at times we get stuck, and we are all humans, so we have to
Yes.
and get some help from people, and these people are really good. That's why. So thank you. I mean, Yash, is a very beautiful
I
thing.
actually see a comment here, Aru. So
Yeah.
Ankit says that SharePoint integration is coming to Power Automate Desktop as a part of Wave 2 enhancements. We want to see how it changes Power Automate Desktop and Power Automate integration use cases. So basically, I mean, interacting with SharePoint is again using through the API itself. So I'm not sure how that integration is being done. We'll only be able to find it out once it is rolled out. But then again, the same thing applies over here. If you've seen that automation scenario that I was talking about, where you have an Excel file which does not have data formatted as a table, which is the primary requirement of a cloud flow. So you read it on a desktop flow, and if you don't want to send it back to a cloud flow, you could directly just patch it onto SharePoint and still send back a notification to the cloud flow stating that this has been completed. Because to truly automate this, such a scenario, you would have to integrate the desktop flow with the cloud flow because the desktop flow cannot call itself. You'll have to do that from the cloud flow itself. So there's going to be at least one exchange happening between the two platforms.
Yeah, Ritika, thanks. Actually, I missed out. I just saw the comment from Cleven, so I thought like, yeah. So I think which Ganesh asked, Sina, he actually asked a question which
Yes.
you answered. Yeah, I mean, Ganesh, is this the answer which Yash is okay for you? I mean, I think it's a pretty well elaborated which you explained, right? Yeah. So I think there are no other questions. I have a question for you, Yash. Yeah, I
Yes, yes,
mean,
please.
for the people who are learning Power Automate Desktop, you mentioned about the RPA, right? Any other resources which you maybe on blog or something which they can understand and then um, do on their tenants? Is it anything which you can advise?
Definitely. So basically, there are two or three things over here. RPA in a day is basically your go-to package when you're first starting with building your first Power Automate desktop flow. Then after that, there is a fellow MVP in the Microsoft ecosystem. I always mess up the pronunciation of their name, but it is I'll just put the name on the chat. So you can follow him. I'll actually get his Twitter URL. So he does a lot of blogs and sessions on Power Automate Desktop. You can definitely check that out. The third thing is there's also probably a Microsoft Learn page coming up because there's a new certification in beta, I guess, for RPA. So that is also a good learning path which will develop soon.
Yeah, that is PL 500, right? That
Yes,
one.
yes, that is
Okay.
PL 500, correct.
Yeah. It just came up from beta, so I think people who are want to get hands dirty and see how the RPA can work in your and organization, or want to just want to try out, you can go to that certifications. No go certificate, at least learn the things which are in the MS Learn. It at least you get the idea.
Correct.
Yeah.
Apart from that, it's like earlier it was required that we had a Windows 10 Pro machine and you connect it with a data gateway and so on. But now they have made it very simple because the motto is automation for everyone. So Power Automate Desktop without a license, but with a basic Power Automate license, can also be used for your personal automation on your Windows 10 or Windows 11 home machines as well. I don't know if it is there on Windows 11, but it works on Windows 10 for sure.
Sure, sure. Yeah. So Sanjay, we will provide the link to you. Let me get some questions. I mean, I need the further questions. We provide the link to you on the app and a day things. To don't worry on this. Any other further questions by anyone else here, so that we can just give a, final question to Yash in case you have anything. I think no questions so far. I mean, I'm really grateful that at least I learned of that. And you mentioned that you will provide a URL, right, about the video. You can just share it in this team chat later on.
I will do that also. I just put the link to Thomas's Twitter profile. So he does a lot of sessions and blogs about learning RPA. So
Yeah,
good,
yeah.
good follow.
Yeah, I'm in touch with him as well. The Topaz,
Yeah.
right? Like, yeah, he's like a RPA guy. I just asked him
Yes.
that. Yeah, he's pretty nice, and I mostly do that's mostly RPA and Nintex. I know him from Nintex world as well. So yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So good to thanks for just sharing these links. At least people can have a better clarity that whom they can contact. So yeah, thanks Yash for your time, and really grateful that you give amazing session.
Thank
And
you so much.
yeah, thanks a lot. Yeah. So guys, thank you. We thank Yash for his valuable time on Saturday afternoon. Yes, Saturday afternoon is evening time as well. So thank you,
Yeah.
Yash. Thanks a lot. Yeah,
Great. Thank you so much.
yeah, yeah.